Welcome to Geekstorians, the show where we unwrap the odd, wonderful, and occasionally baffling stories that build geek culture. I'm Dave from Geektown, and today we're taking a little festive detour because before streaming, before Blu-ray box sets, before even the idea of expanded universes, there was something. A piece of Star Wars history so strange, so chaotic, and so immediately disowned that once it aired, it then vanished. And that is where our Christmas special begins. It's the 17th of November, 1978, a Friday evening. American living rooms glowing like they're all part of the same giant Christmas card. CBS is about to air their first ever Star Wars spin-off. 1 year after A New Hope, the world is still dizzy with lightsabers and space wizards. Kids are vibrating, parents are excited, and grandparents are politely supportive. This is it, for the first time, more Star Wars. On television, and for free. The music plays, the logo shines, and millions of people lean forward. And what they get is 10 uninterrupted minutes of Wookiee domestic life. No subtitles, no translation, just 3 giant space bears doing chores and arguing in resonant growls while celebrating something called Wookiee Life Day. And American viewers collectively wonder if their TV had broken. And that's the normal part, because the next 90 minutes, viewers will see Harvey Korman doing intergalactic cookery, Jefferson Starship rocking a holographic dream sequence, Art Carney trying to sweet-talk aliens, the legendary B. Arthur running the Mos Eisley Cantina like she's closing up after a very questionable office Christmas party, and Chewbacca's dad experiencing a festive VR fantasy so unsettling it makes the cantina scene look like Downton Abbey. The credits roll, the room falls silent. Parents turn to their children with a look that says, "Is this what you're into now?" And the next day, nothing. No reruns, no VHS release, no official acknowledgement. The Star Wars Holiday Special simply disappears. But Star Wars has fans. And fans don't let things disappear. Not even this. This is the story of a lost broadcast, a decade-long treasure hunt, and the fandom that refused to let the strangest thing in the galaxy stay forgotten. Welcome to Geekstorians Christmas Special, the hunt for the Star Wars Holiday Special. So let's start at the beginning. The Star Wars Holiday Special has a reputation. Not the usual sort of cult classic, not even so bad it's good. It's more like the tone someone uses when they tell you they once spent a night trapped in a lift with a mime. People talk about it like it was an event they barely escaped. And it's easy to shrug and say, well, it was the 70s, things were strange, maybe it's just another bit of oddball Christmas telly. But that really undersells it. Because the holiday special wasn't just awkward, it was a moment two completely different entertainment worlds collided. Star Wars at the height of its cultural power and American network television at the peak of its own chaotic confidence. On one side, you had a franchise built on world building and visual effects breakthroughs and sincere belief that space operas could be mythic. On the other side, you had 1970s variety US TV. A place where scripts were loose, sleeves were flared, and the definition of entertainment could change depending on which celebrity was available that week. CBS commissioned the holiday special when Star Wars was barely 18 months old, and on paper the logic was sound enough. Kids love Star Wars, kids love Christmas, therefore Star Wars at Christmas. Makes perfect sense. And for a moment, everybody involved seemed to genuinely believe that. But from the very first production meeting, things began to wobble. Writers left, directors complained, scripts were rewritten on the day, sometimes actually during a take. The production had all the stability of a Jawa sandcrawler missing 3 wheels. And looming over all of this was a single creative note from George Lucas himself. Make it about Wookiees. Which is a lovely idea in theory, until you remember that Wookiees don't speak English, which meant the creative team were now trying to produce an entire Christmas special where the main characters communicated in extended emotional roars. But this was network television, so it still needed jokes and songs and guest stars and segments. It needed a structure. What we ended up with was a compromise that pleased no one. A patchwork of sci-fi, variety show spectacle, musical numbers, surreal comedy, and long stretches of unintelligible Wookiee domestic life. Even the actual Star Wars cast, Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher, appeared throughout the special with the slightly glassy expression of people wondering whether their agent had fled the country. By the time CBS had realised what they'd created, the broadcast slot was locked. Advertisers were in, publicity was done, and millions were expecting it. There was absolutely no escape. When the holiday special finally aired, it wasn't a simple misfire. It was a spectacular reminder that Star Wars was a cinematic phenomenon, and television in 1978 was absolutely not ready for it. This was a program that had the Star Wars brand on the front of it, but absolutely no idea what to do with it. But if the special itself was strange, what happened next was stranger, because after that single broadcast, after the Wookiees and the musical numbers and B. Arthur serving drinks in the cantina, CBS quietly pretended it didn't exist. And that's where the fans step in. When the Star Wars Holiday Special finished its one and only broadcast, something quite strange happened. Nothing. No repeats, no encore airings, no coming up next week. CBS didn't just move on, they really sealed the door behind it. And Lucasfilm took silence into an art form. They never issued a statement disowning the special, they never apologised for it, they never even acknowledged it existed. It simply slipped off the face of the earth. 1 week after airing, it was as if the holiday special had been a strange collected fever dream, the kind you don't talk about at breakfast because you're not sure what it says about you. For years, fans assumed there had to be a straightforward explanation. Networks didn't just lose things, studios don't forget something they've produced, and Star Wars certainly doesn't simply evaporate. So why did this? The most likely answer is a combination of embarrassment and logistics. Lucas disliked the special from the moment he saw a rough cut, supposedly muttering things that would have melted a stormtrooper's helmet. And the CBS executives quietly agreed. Home video existed in 1978, but only just. Most people didn't own a machine, and most studios weren't thinking in terms of repeats or reissues. A bad broadcast wasn't a future collectible, it was just something you rather hoped people forgot. Once it aired, the job was done, and the master tapes, they could have gone anywhere. Into a vault, onto a shelf, into a box with a label nobody ever read again, or the popular fan theory quietly destroyed to prevent future generations asking difficult questions. Because in the late 70s, studios didn't treat television recordings as sacred relics. They were assets, or rather the tape was. Things were stored until the contract was up, or until you needed the tape for something else. There are rumours, surprisingly plausible ones, that the original broadcast master was wiped, recycled, or stored so carelessly that it may as well have been thrown into a Sarlacc pit. And when Lucasfilm began consolidating its archives in the following decades, the holiday special was conspicuously absent. The message was clear, without ever being spoken. This never happened, please stop asking.
Leave me alone.
But Star Wars fans are persistent. In fact, the moment the special vanished, its legend doubled overnight. Because if you want to make something irresistible to geeks, two things always work. Tell them it's terrible, and tell them they're not allowed to see it. Suddenly, the holiday special became a rumour whispered at conventions. Did you see it? Did you watch it live? Did anyone record it? Does a copy even exist anymore? Most people did miss the original broadcast. After all, you'd only seen it if you happened to be near a television on that particular Friday night. If your family was out, or you were at a school event, or you simply lived in the wrong region, you'd never know what you'd missed. And that sense of almost but not quite seeing it created a perfect storm. because a lost piece of Star Wars in the era before streaming, before DVDs and the internet, it wasn't just rare, it was mythic. The holiday special didn't fade away, it became a quest. In the shadow of all this silence, in bedrooms and garages and tape drawers and the bottom shelves of TV cabinets, a small group of fans were sitting on something precious and maybe didn't realise. VHS tapes, recorded off-air in 1978. Copies that would become the seeds of one of the most unusual fan-driven preservation efforts in pop culture history. Because the holiday special might have been buried by television, but bootleggers were already warming up their VCRs. If the holiday special vanished from the official records, you'd never know it from the way fans talked about it in the years following. Because while CBS and Lucasfilm were quietly sweeping everything under the Life Day rug, a small number of households had something extraordinary. Actual recordings. VHS tapes recorded off-air straight from the broadcast. The only surviving copies of the weirdest night in Star Trek history. And most of the people that had them didn't realise what they were sitting on. Often it was a tape shoved at the back of a cupboard sandwiched between a Christmas panto and an old news broadcast, or a cassette labelled Star Wars with a bunch of question marks after it in felt tip by a parent who couldn't quite make sense of what they'd just watched. But as the years went by, those tapes became treasures, because it wasn't just lost media, this was lost Star Wars. And in the pre-internet era, that meant the only way to preserve it was to copy it. So fans began duplicating the holiday special the same way medieval monks copied manuscripts. Slowly, carefully, and with whatever equipment happened to be lying around. Second generation copies, third generation copies, and by the time you hit the sixth or seventh generation, the image was so snowy you could barely distinguish B. Arthur from a blurry ghost trying to serve drinks in a haunted cantina. But people didn't care. The magic wasn't in the picture quality. It was in the fact that this thing existed at all. And so during the 80s and 90s, the holiday special spread through fandom the way folklore does, by being told, traded, and whispered about. At sci-fi conventions, fans would discreetly sidle up to you and say, "Psst, I've got a copy," and then hand over a VHS in a plain cardboard sleeve like they were making a deal in a spaceport alley. Sometimes you'd see it advertised in the tiniest corner of a fanzine. Rare Star Wars recording for trade-only serious collectors. Occasionally somebody would turn up with what they claimed was a cleaner version, usually because their uncle in Chicago had a better aerial in 1978. People spoke about the tape quality with the same reverence audio engineers reserve for pristine vinyl. "I've got a second-gen copy. I've got a copy with the commercials still intact. I've got one where the tracking almost works if you hold the VCR at an angle." It was absurd and wonderful, and it was fandom at its most inventive and stubborn. And because all this was happening long before YouTube, before torrents and digital anything, the only way to spread the special was hand-to-hand through a network of fans who refused to let it die. And that meant in December, which was convention season and meetup season, it became the perfect time for copies of the holiday special to quietly change hands. Not because anyone saw it as a festive ritual, it was simply the right people found themselves in the same room. A fan would tap another on the arm and say, "I've got something you might want to see." A brown envelope would change pockets, a handshake with a conspiratorial grin, a whispered, "It's weird, but you really need to witness it." It was a network, a loose web of fans passing around an artefact the official channels had abandoned. Sometimes at conventions, or sometimes through fan clubs, sometimes through postal trades where you'd send off your best blank tape and hope whatever came back was at least watchable. Every copy carried a little mystery. Would it include adverts? Was it recorded from a different region? Did it have the animated segment intact? Fans weren't comparing picture quality, they were comparing stories. Where did yours come from? Who recorded it? My friend swears his uncle taped it off air, but nobody can find the cassette. The version I've got has got an intro that I've never seen before. The tapes travelled like folklore, changing hands, picking up rumours, gaining little bits of context as they moved. It wasn't about the perfect copy, it was about having one at all. Proof that this bizarre thing had truly aired, and evidence that you weren't imagining it. But as time passed and as digital tools crept into bedrooms, fans with technical skills got curious and the tone began to shift. People started wondering, what if I could make a cleaner version? What if I can find some earlier generation tapes? What if I could make something better? And the obsession started to change shape. By the time we reached the early 90s, the holiday special had taken on a new identity. It was no longer just a bootleg, it was folklore, a myth that you could actually watch if you knew the right person, attended the right convention, or owned a VCR that hadn't eaten a tape since floppy disks were considered a legitimate storage strategy. But folklore isn't enough for some fans, not when it comes to Star Wars, because every fandom eventually produces a particular type of enthusiast, not a collector or a theorist or a cosplayer, but the archivist. A fan who looks at a wobbly 7th generation copy and feels a deep spiritual need to fix it, to restore it, to undo years of tape degradation, if only to answer important cultural questions like, is B. Arthur actually visible in that scene, or am I looking at a pile of pixels with a good singing voice? With the rise of home computers, early capture cards and the first digital editing tools, fans began experimenting. Someone digitized a 4th generation tape, someone else ran it through a primitive denoising filter, another spliced in cleaner commercials from a different broadcast region. Composite edits emerged, Frankenstein versions assembled from the cleanest surviving fragments. It was like watching restoration work on the Sistine Chapel, if the Sistine Chapel featured a Wookiee family arguing their way through Life Day. But here's where things get interesting. Because buried inside that holiday special, beneath all the Wookiee domestic chaos and questionable music numbers, is something genuinely meaningful. Boba Fett. An animated short, the one bright spot in the entire bizarre program, wasn't just a curiosity. It was Boba Fett's first on-screen appearance in the Star Wars universe. And for fans, that mattered. People forget how strange his origin story is. His first ever public outing was a couple of months earlier in September 1978 at the San Anselmo County Fair Parade, where Lucasfilm staffer Dwayne Dunham walked the streets of California in the very first prototype Boba Fett costume because he was, quite literally, the right size. But the holiday special, that was Fett's on-screen debut, predating Empire Strikes Back by almost 2 years. So when archivists worked to improve their copies of the special, they weren't just polishing a cult oddity, they were preserving a lost chapter of Star Wars history, the one part of the special that genuinely endured. And that gave the whole restoration effort an unexpected sense of purpose. A feeling that somewhere inside this audiovisual fever dream was something that was actually worth saving. As fan communities grew online in Usenet groups and forums and these early websites with neon starfields and a very optimistic download button, restoration became collaborative. People compared versions like museum curators. I've got a clearer colour. I've got one that's got better audio. I have one that has the Chicago adverts. This one might be from a Betamax source. And rumours swirled of pristine copies, international broadcast masters, or lost 16mm reels. None confirmed, but all tantalising. By the time we hit the 2000s, the quest for the cleanest possible holiday special had become a hobby in its own right, part detective work, part archaeology, and part festive masochism. Fans were doing the job the studio refused to do, treating this bizarre, half-forgotten TV experiment with the same reverence normally reserved for lost Doctor Who episodes or silent film reels discovered in someone's attic. It may have fallen apart on screen, but it held together in the hands of fans. And as more versions surfaced, digitized, cleaner, stitched together, traded, torrented, burnt onto DVDs and labeled with Sharpies, the holiday special wasn't just being saved. It was drifting towards something unexpected, a tradition. By the time the 2000s arrived, the Star Wars Holiday Special had undergone a peculiar transformation. The thing Lucasfilm refused to acknowledge, the thing CBS buried, the thing fans copied across so many generations that B. Arthur began to resemble a fuzzy Golden Girl-shaped blob, had become a Christmas tradition. Not universally, of course. This was not a Die Hard situation where the debate is whether this is a Christmas film, which Die Hard totally is. This was more niche, more committed. There was something Christmassy about pairing classics with something that makes the room collectively question its life choices. So you get Elf, you get Die Hard, It's a Wonderful Life, and then follow it up with the holiday special. Some families reach for the warm, the cozy, the dependable. Others, a very particular, very determined subset, decide that Christmas isn't complete without a blanket, some hot chocolate, and 90 minutes of Wookiee domestic chaos. And the remarkable thing is how sincere it became. Because yes, part of the appeal was ironic. Part of it was leaning into the absurdity. But beneath that was a genuine sense of togetherness, a ritual built on shared bewilderment. And people would sit through the entire special just to get to that Boba Fett bit. It became the holiday special's chocolate in the advent calendar, the moment everyone was waiting for. The one part of the programme that looked genuinely like Star Wars rather than a particularly eccentric holiday panto. Fans would put on the tape at Christmas and say things like, "Hold on, the good bit's coming," as if they were talking about a Bond car chase or a big Avengers moment. And slowly the act of watching, the yearly sit-down with whatever battered or remastered version you had, became part of fandom's seasonal rhythm. People organised watch parties, themed screenings, Life Day celebrations with Wookiee cookies and ugly jumpers. Some brave groups even attempted to sing along with Carrie Fisher's Life Day ballad, which is a very strong choice after some mulled wine. And online, the ritual blossomed even further. You got reaction videos, frame-by-frame breakdowns, memes of Chewbacca's dad in his unsettling VR headset, staring into the middle distance like he's seen the true meaning of Christmas and immediately regretted it. In its own strange way, the holiday special had gone from lost media to cult comfort watch. Not because it was good, we have mountains of evidence proving otherwise, but because it was a shared oddity. A warm, nostalgic ritual built around the idea that sometimes the worst parts of a franchise are the ones that we bond over most. But there was something else happening, quietly and slowly in the background, a kind of shift that you didn't spot at first. A flicker here, a reference there, little moments where the boundary between official Star Wars and fan-kept oddity began to blur ever so slightly. Nothing dramatic, nothing headline-worthy, just echoes. A nod you'd catch if you knew what you were looking for, a wink that seemed to say, yeah, we remember this too. For the fans who kept the holiday special alive, who traded the VHS tapes and fixed the tracking lines and cleaned up the audio hiss, and sat through it every December like a slightly chaotic Christmas carol, these tiny ripples felt meaningful. Almost like the strange little tradition they preserved for decades was starting to leave a faint imprint on the galaxy again. Which brings us to the final part of our story. Not the disappearance, not the hunt, not even the annual tradition of Wookiee chaos. But what happens when something fans kept alive long enough begins to matter again? If you've followed the holiday special from its chaotic broadcast to its disappearance to its life as a secret festive tradition passed between fans, there's one question that's still hanging in the air. Why? Why did this bizarre, half-forgotten piece of television cling to the edges of the galaxy for so long? It shouldn't have lasted. It shouldn't have been remembered. Most things like it vanish instantly, taped over, thrown out, deleted, forgotten. And yet this didn't. Part of the answer is simple. Fans are stubborn. They preserve things that the official record loses interest in. They archive, they share. They insist that even the strange, unpolished, slightly embarrassing fragments of culture are worth keeping. But the deeper answer is this. Stories aren't kept alive by creators. They're kept alive by the people who love them. Every tape copied and digital cleanup, every snowy VHS pulled off a shelf at Christmas, every gathering of fans that said, "Have you seen this?" That's what kept the holiday special alive long enough to become more than a curiosity. It became tradition, a ritual, a reminder that fandom isn't about just the highlights, it's about the communal experience, even when the thing you watched is questionable at best. But here's where our story takes a twist that nobody in 1978 could have predicted. Because the holiday special didn't just survive as fan tradition. It didn't stay on the fringes. Bits of it, the parts that fans loved, talked about and laughed about, quoted and clung to, began to quietly find its way back into the galaxy. Life Day, The in-universe holiday that formed the entire backbone of the special, the thing that the franchise once tried to erase, now has an official entry on StarWars.com. It's appeared in novels, in comics, and reference guides. And in The Mandalorian, it's mentioned out loud, with a smile, like an old friend finally welcomed home. And the strange part, nobody made a big deal of it. No press release, no apology, no reintroducing Life Days, sorry about the Wookiee VR headset. It just slipped quietly back into canon, as if it'd been waiting for its moment. And that's because of the people now steering Star Wars. Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, the new generation of storytellers that grew up hearing the same whispered stories, the same you won't believe this tales that kept the holiday special alive. They heard about the holiday special the same way everyone else did, through fans. And when they finally reached the bridge and took the controls, they didn't hold that weirdness at arm's length. They embraced it. Because for them, as for so many fans, the holiday special isn't a mistake, it's a memory. A messy, off-brand, disco-soaked memory, but a memory all the same. And memories have a way of working themselves back into the story. So the holiday special never got a 4K remaster it absolutely does not need, and it probably never will. But the moment Life Day returned to canon quietly, gracefully, and without fanfare, it proves something important. That the things fans keep alive, even the weird ones and the flawed ones, can outlast any attempt to bury them. That the boundaries between official and fan-kept is porous. That the galaxy is big enough for the polished films and the snowy VHS memories. And that sometimes the strangest artefact in the franchise history becomes part of the mythology again, not because it's a masterpiece, but because fans carried it there. And that might be the most festive message of all. Stories survive because we love them, even the odd ones. And that brings us to the end of our Geekstorians Christmas Special, a tale of Wookiees, bootleggers, animated bounty hunters, and fans who refuse to let a very strange corner of Star Wars history fade away. If you enjoyed this festive dive into the archives, or if you're now staring at your TV wondering whether to attempt your own Life Day viewing on YouTube, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with more stories from the long and winding road of geek culture, but until then, have a wonderful holiday. Whatever you're watching, may your tapes track cleanly and your hot chocolate stay warm, and may all your festive specials be at least slightly easier to follow than the Star Wars one. If you want more of this sort of thing, you can find us at geektown.co.uk. And of course, every week, also over on Geektown Radio, packed with TV news, reviews, and interviews from across the world of geek entertainment. Thank you for listening, and happy Life Day.